Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Aisha Hanif. I'm the Strategic Communications Specialist at USAID Eastern and Southern Caribbean and your Master of Ceremonies for this morning's proceedings. I want to welcome you to this highly anticipated launch event of the CARICOM Resilience Fund. We're gathered here today to celebrate a groundbreaking collaboration that holds the promise of fostering resilience, sustainability, and prosperity in the Eastern and Southern Caribbean region. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to our distinguished guests, including Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mia Amour-Motley, other government of Barbados ministers, including Minister Ryan Strawn, U.S. Ambassador to Barbados, the Eastern Caribbean, and the OECS, Roger Nayas, Regional Representative of USAID ESC, Mervyn Farrow, Chief Executive Officer of the CARICOM Development Fund, Rodinald Sumer, President and CEO of Cygnus Capital, U.S. Embassy officials, specially invited guests, and all those who have played a crucial role in making this partnership a reality. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm excited to welcome you to this historic event where we witness the synergy between the CARICOM Development Fund and the United States Agency for International Development as they embark on a transformative journey with the launch of the CARICOM Resilience Fund. This collaboration represents a shared commitment to building a resilient, sustainable, and prosperous future for the Eastern and Southern Caribbean. As we begin the formal proceedings to launch the CARICOM Resilience Fund here, I now invite the Chief Executive Officer of the CARICOM Development Fund, Mr. Rodinald Sumer, to the podium to deliver his remarks. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you, Madam Mistress of Ceremonies. Honorable Mia Amour-Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados, Ambassador Roger Nayas, newly appointed United States Ambassador to Barbados, OECS, and the Eastern Caribbean, representative of the CARICOM Secretariat, Ambassador Wayne McCook, Mr. Beresford Gray, President and Chief Executive Officer, Cygnus Group, representatives of regional institutions, heads and representatives of pension funds and other potential partners, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, including those joining us online, good morning. Welcome to the official launch of the CARICOM Resilience Fund, which is being established under the auspices of the CARICOM Development Fund, CDF, in partnership with the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. The CARICOM Development Fund was established in 2008 under Article 158 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. The creation of the fund responds to the imperative identified in Article 157 of the revised treaty to urgently address the needs of the disadvantaged countries, regions, and sectors in CARICOM to enable them to participate effectively in the CARICOM Single Market and Economy, the CSME, and to administer international trade agreements. In this regard, the CDF, in execution of its mandate, is intended to address the needs of both the public and private sectors. But interestingly also, the CDF is also able to accept subventions from private sector entities of the member states or from other entities external to the community. This places the CDF in an ideal position to establish an investment fund that is capitalized by private investors, institutional and impact investors, as well as development finance institutions that support private sector development, and the proceeds of which are deployed in private sector projects. In this instance, for investments that build resilience. At a very broad level, this is the structure and orientation of the CARICOM Resilience Fund. Private sector driven, private sector focused. The core of the CDF's mandate is to promote social and economic cohesion within the CSME, including by addressing social and economic disparities that may arise from or be exacerbated by the implementation of the CSME. We seek to do so by providing technical and concessional financial assistance to achieve a number of objectives: to attract investment and new industries to disadvantaged countries, regions, and sectors, ameliorate or arrest adverse economic and social impact arising from the operation of the CSME, improve the efficiency and competitiveness of industry, and achieve structural diversification and infrastructural development. In the agreement relating to the operation of the CDF, contributions and subventions to our capital fund and the programs to be financed from these resources are set to occur in 4 to 5 year cycles, the third such cycle to run over the period 2024 to 2028. However, within the current context of the high debt burdens and limited fiscal space experienced by CDF member countries, aggravated by the lingering impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, there are challenges in replenishing the fund in the usual manner. So let me state up front that it is fortuitous that we are able to launch the CARICOM Resilience Fund at this juncture, since it is a vehicle that would attract external, non-government resources from the regional and international private sector and from international development partners for investment in building economic and climate resilience, which is an objective consistent with the developmental mandate of the CDF. CARICOM currently has 15 member states, including the independent countries of the Commonwealth Caribbean, plus Haiti, Montserrat, and Suriname. Out of that 15, the Bahamas, Montserrat, and Haiti are not full-fledged members of the CSME and are therefore not currently member countries of the CDF, although some of them are eligible to become members of the CDF. There are also 5 associate members of CARICOM, which are overseas territories of the United Kingdom. These countries are also not members of the CDF and are therefore not explicitly targeted to benefit from the deployment of the proceeds of the CARICOM Resilience Fund. But they are no less vulnerable to economic shocks and the impacts of climate change, as relatively recent severe weather events have demonstrated. Therefore, even while we are just at the stage of launching the CARICOM Resilience Fund today, I am signaling up front that it would be highly desirable for us to build on the momentum that we expect will be generated by this fund to scale up the initiative to serve the needs of all member countries of the wider CARICOM, given that we are all united in vulnerability by virtue of our geography. The CDF's core thematic priority areas that guide our development interventions within the context of the CSME include regional investment promotion and mobilization, human capacity development, business development and enterprise competitiveness, environmental resilience and climate action, infrastructure, community empowerment, and a special focus on agriculture as a disadvantaged economic sector. As will become evident a little later in today's program, the sectors that have been targeted by the CRF for resilience building investments align well with all of the CDF's core thematic program areas. But allow me to highlight just one of these areas: environmental resilience and climate action. At the recently held COP28 in Dubai, world leaders, including Caribbean leaders, reaffirmed that there is a climate emergency. This emergency is evident in the intensifying and permanent state of vulnerability of Caribbean small island states and others at the front line of the battle against climate change. Mechanisms to finance climate-related loss and damage and build resilience that will mitigate impacts and give Caribbean countries some ability to withstand and recover from severe weather events are paramount to the region, given the outsized impact that climate change has on Caribbean territories. Against a backdrop of significant post-COVID uncertainty and continued pressures on national budgets, governments across CARICOM have been calling for additional, innovative, and creative means of financing development projects aimed at improving resilience in the face of climate change. In direct response, the CDF is answering a call from the CARICOM heads of government to develop the market for growth and resilience investing, supported by a pipeline of bankable projects. In accepting that challenge and to deliver on the mandate, the CDF entered a partnership with the USAID, as we recognized that we needed a partner that would help us begin to mobilize the significant amounts of financial and technical resources required. We needed to engage stakeholders in the region to respond proactively to bolster the preparedness of our communities and to offer a transformative solution that shifts the paradigm away from waiting for the next disaster or climate event to happen. To achieve this, we sought to establish a fund that would crowd in blended financing from the private sector, international financial institutions, pension funds, corporates, philanthropic funds, among others, and to innovate to create a hitherto unexploited source of financing resilience in the region that would be relatively easy and quick to access once established, and that would help close the resilience building gap. Hence, the CARICOM Resilience Fund, a transformative private sector-driven vehicle that would offer investors attractive social and economic returns on investments and capital seekers, particularly SMEs, a viable and affordable private sector option for financing their contribution to economic and climate resilience building in the Caribbean. And the launch of the CARICOM Resilience Fund today is a significant milestone for the CDF, coinciding as it does with the 15th anniversary of our establishment. Testament to how far the CDF has come, even as we acknowledge that we have much further to go to fully deliver on the very broad mandate to achieve social and economic cohesion in CARICOM. Finally, to help operationalize the CRF, I am happy to announce that the CDF has appointed Cygnus Capital as fund manager. If you want to give a round of applause, you can do that. They will be introduced later in the program and provide more details on the structure and intended operations of the CARICOM Resilience Fund. It was very important for us to appoint a manager from the region, as a fund of this nature must be built around solutions that are sensitive and tailored to the needs of our community, taking into consideration our geography, socioeconomic dynamics, and our cultural and political nuances, and that seeks to maximize the use of the capacity of the region, including the tremendous talent that exists in our institutions in both the public and private sectors. In closing, I want to acknowledge and congratulate the team that has been instrumental in bringing us to the milestone of this fund launch today. Now, you will have to forgive me because I will not be able to mention everybody, but I need to mention a few people. Staff of the CDF, in particular, our senior economist, Dr. Laverne McFarlane. Members of the USAID Invest team, the leadership of USAID itself, Mervyn and your team. And cross-boundary, especially Jamie McInerney and his team, who were contracted by USAID to provide CDF with technical support and guidance in establishing the fund over the last year. And last, but certainly by no means least, Prime Minister Mia Amor-Motley. For challenging us to be ambitious and creative in responding to the mandate from the community, and for her tireless advocacy and support along the way. So while we don't have glasses to raise at this point, but I'm sure we will later today, here's to a successful launch, a successful fundraise, and a productive investment period of closing deals with the CRF to address climate and economic resilience in CARICOM. Again, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sumer. Please give him another big round of applause. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you the U.S. Ambassador to Barbados, the Eastern Caribbean, and the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, Roger Nias, who will deliver remarks on behalf of the United States government. Welcome, Ambassador.
How ya? Good morning. I'm just glad you put me before the Prime Minister. So thank you so much, because it would be a hard act to follow. And this is my first meeting with the Prime Minister, and I've been a big fan, and it's so wonderful to meet you, and I look forward to working with you. So I just completed my first week as U.S. Ambassador to Barbados, and I have to say I'm in love. You see, I'm an indigenous person. I may not look like it because my dad is Norwegian, but I come from a long line of Chinook Indian tribal members. In fact, my great uncle was the chair of the tribe, which is essentially the chief. This is the tribe that greeted Lewis and Clark when they traveled across the US on their exploratory journey, and they most likely would have perished if they had not met my tribe and my ancestors. I'm also one of the few Native American ambassadors ever in US history. It's kind of incredible, but that is true. And I grew up in a tiny fishing village on the Pacific Ocean, much like Oistins. I visited, it felt much like home, and it even rained a little bit, so I was like, this is home. And so for me, climate change is personal, because my home and my family are threatened just like yours. And that's why today is so special and important. It's why I'm delighted to join you today at this incredible launch of the CARICOM Development Fund's Resilience Fund. It's why I'm especially grateful for the incredible leadership of Prime Minister Motley. You are a global champion. I've been following you for a long time. My confirmation process took forever. And so I got to learn a lot and follow and read, and I really enjoyed following the journey. And I really look forward to getting into some good trouble with you, because I'm not your conventional ambassador. I'm not sure my team or the State Department really know what to do with me, but we are going to have a lot of fun. and we're going to get good things done. Thank you. The Biden-Harris administration has made addressing climate change one of its top priorities. And for me as ambassador, it is my #1 priority. I am going to filter all of our decisions through a lens of climate change, regional security, and economic prosperity. That's how I will spend my time. It's how we will make big decisions at the embassy. And that's already, everyone in the embassy can recite my 3 priorities because they're simple and easy, and they're all interrelated. And actually, I developed those priorities not by myself in a vacuum in Seattle, but by talking to many people, including the ambassadors to the 7 countries to which I will be accredited. I met all of them in DC. I also met the consuls general in Miami and talked with many stakeholders along the way. And so I just became accredited on Friday here in Barbados, and I leave on Tuesday for a 6-country month-long journey to present my credentials. And what you may not know is I have more countries in my portfolio than any U.S. ambassador. And it's a big job, and I'm really excited because the people on the team, the U.S. team, are so dedicated and qualified, and I know they're dedicated to a mutual benefit. So really, so honored to partner. You'll also find that I'm more of a servant leader than a top-down leader. So I like there's a saying in my tribe. It's actually a sign, and you may see me use it occasionally, but you'll see this in tribal events, and what it means is I lift you up higher than myself. And that is, it's a very humble expression, but it's celebrating others and saying, my job is to make sure the team is successful. My job is to make sure that the high priorities are accomplished and that we make serious progress on what I believe is the most existential threat in our lifetimes, which is climate change. These severe weather events, like the 2 often hurricanes, those demand urgent attention, but there are devastating and slow onset events as well. You know, ocean acidification, you know, habitat loss, biodiversity loss, and those impact all of us as well. So the proactive measures that we need to take must address both immediate and long-term environmental challenges. Many of you have heard of PAC 2030, which is the U.S. Caribbean partnership to address the climate crisis. Through that, we are committed to advancing climate adaptation and resilience, clean energy cooperation, all while working toward achieving the long-term goals of the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. So the fund that's being announced today, this CARICOM Development Fund's Resilience Fund, will build on so much great work that's already happening, and also great investments that the United States has made and committed to in even the last year and a half. $100 million in development funding has been committed. Another $40 million in humanitarian assistance funding. That's in addition to hopefully what we can help raise with this resilience fund. I'm especially excited about the private sector connection. I come from the private sector. I spent 30 years building and running a business. And through that, I look forward to helping and commit to the team that I will commit my connections to identify potential investors in this fund. And that is something that hopefully will pay off significantly. I will also, just a quick shout out to the USAID Eastern and Southern Caribbean Office for two programs that are very much complementary to this Resilience Fund, and that's the Program for Accelerating Climate Adaptation in the Caribbean, PACA, which was launched last year, and that focuses on building climate information databases and increasing the flow of international climate finance in the region. And then second is the Blue-Green Bank here in Barbados, fostering private and public initiatives related to climate resilience, including a focus on low and middle income households and underserved populations. So this fund today symbolizes not just an allocation of resources, but a promise to invest in innovative solutions, technologies, and strategies that really help all of us. So with that, I want to say how excited I am to be here. It's such a beautiful country, amazing people. I've committed to learning one Bajan phrase a day. Some of them are probably not appropriate to use right now, but I will share them in private. And so on behalf of President Biden, Vice President Harris, the United States government, the American people, and myself, we stand with you as your neighbors in the Caribbean region, both as partners and friends, to tackle climate resilience together. And congratulations on this amazing accomplishment. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Nayas. We have a small change in the order of speakers to accommodate Prime Minister Motley's next engagement. So actually, it is now time to hear from our keynote speaker for today, the Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mia Amour Motley. The Prime Minister has been at the forefront of initiatives that promote climate resilience, sustainability, and regional development. Let us warmly welcome Prime Minister Motley to share insights and perspectives on the importance of this Resilience Fund. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ministers of Cabinet, Minister Strawn, Minister Monroe-Knight, Ambassador Nias, distinguished guests all, but in particular, my dear friend and brother, Roddy Suma. Ambassador, the similarities which you drew in your speech would certainly ensure that you are truly welcomed by the people of this nation who, in spite of their bravado, love to be able to find other people who share common values and similar circumstances. The paradox that you represent, one of the largest countries in the world, and certainly the most powerful, is seriously contrasted with your own peculiar story. And that in and of itself will resonate with Barbadians who will find that the pathway to resilience has not only been theirs against the mighty forces of history, but that in your own family's circumstances, you have known what it is to also have in your DNA that character that builds resilience. And that common pathway that you have had with what we have had brings us to a unique point this morning in this particular event that speaks to the building of further resilience in our region. As we say many times, we didn't ask for this, we didn't start this, but it is what it is, and this is where we are. And that has led us to the clear recognition that just as our ancestors and your ancestors had to find ways to survive, that we must be creative, and as you heard from Roddy, yes, bold, in charting new ground, in ensuring that we can win this race in seeking to ensure that our region remains viable, insurable, and livable. And I use those three because we will only be viable if life can be sustained, and life being sustained is first, yes, about the physical and environmental realities in which we live, but it is also about the ability to meet the basic needs of life, which therefore must be driven by economic growth and prosperity. It is also about recognizing that there are threats. And as we all know, the climate crisis is the existential crisis. The loss of biodiversity is part and parcel of that. But the way in which we have evolved as societies and economies are truly also at risk. I'd like us to focus on the fact that in your own country, on the Pacific coast, you've already started to see signs of why we must win this race and what we must do to win this race. The news that came just under a year ago that insurance companies in California will no longer underwrite fire risk at a time when that state has seen year by year by year more and more devastating wildfires, destroying lives, destroying properties, taking lives, is the canary in the mine for us this time as to where the insurance industry is likely to go in our part of the world. We've already seen in Florida retreating action, that many insurance companies are narrowing what they are prepared to accept as risk. And while the state of Florida has the federal government to support it, and while the residents of Florida have the ease with which they can make decisions to move to another state without having to contend with the difficulties of citizenship and permission, our people in the region, who are an extension of the same risk that Floridians face, do not have that luxury and do not have that option. And I've been asking, as we start to reflect again on what Bridgetown 3.0 will look like, that we begin to understand that the major focus for us within the context of the economic structures and financial systems that we have is to be able to determine what is likely to be the future of the insurance industry in the Caribbean. Insurance is supposed to help you manage risk. But when the risks become almost certain, the insurance sector faces a serious, serious, serious challenge. And that is why our government, along with those of St. Kitts and Nevis and Grenada, were adamant about the establishment of natural disaster clauses in our instruments. The reality is that at the level of the state, as we found recently with the COVID pandemic, that when real crisis hits and when the private sector is unable to step up and households are unable to cope, who has to step in? Governments. We saw it across the entire world. And when disaster hits, you are likely to face similar circumstances as we saw with the pandemic. And to that extent, it therefore meant that we asked ourselves, how best do we prepare ourselves to meet that reality and to ensure that the country can recover as quickly as possible? How can we become more resilient in those circumstances? There was very little options from the IFIs, international financial institutions, very little options for us from anyone. And what we discovered is that by a simple legal clause that we can make available to governments in the Caribbean, and certainly the Barbados government, the Grenadian government, the Kittian government, funds that would not otherwise be available from anywhere. There is no country, no institution, no other government, no other financial institution that will give us the equivalent of almost 20% of GDP over a 2-year period if our country is hit by a serious hurricane or flood or climate disaster. And we have become the largest issuer of commercial paper that includes these natural disaster clauses. Over the last 2 years, with the focus of the Bridgetown Initiative and just before we launched it, we have been able to persuade the World Bank, the British government, and a number of other governments that are now looking at it, to use this simple legal clause to make the difference. But why am I giving you all of this talk when you are here to launch a private sector driven fund? It is because the missing piece of the equation is, in fact, the private sector. And that we need now to ensure that that simple clause that allows us to pause our debt payments, principal and interest, for 2 years, in order to be able to sustain the integrity of the loan instrument, that simple clause ought now to be replicated in private sector instruments in this Caribbean region. It is unlikely that we will be able to outrun the insurance debate in the shortest possible time. We're going to fight it. We're going to try. But what will more help major companies who are looking to be able to protect themselves and to invest to develop the resilience for the long haul? Because we know for every dollar spent in building resilience, we potentially avoid $7 in damage. So that it would seem to me that in the same way we understand that houses that are properly built, even on slopes, can withstand hurricanes and floods and landslides, that we need to ensure that companies that want to finance themselves for the medium to long term need to start to ensure that they can include these same, we call them natural disaster clauses. As with everything else in the world, we learned, Ambassador, that when you take things from us, you change the names. So when we left certain locations, our names were changed. And similarly, natural disaster clauses have now become debt pause clauses in the World Bank and climate resilient clauses in the UK. But by whatever name you call it, what we need is a recognition that this must not simply be an approach used by governments, but now needs to be included in private sector financial instruments in the Caribbean. And I pray and hope, Roddy, that in the same way the CARICOM Development Fund responded to our requests to be able to do two things: be truthful to its mandate, which you set out for us at the beginning, under the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, to assist disadvantaged countries, disadvantaged sectors, disadvantaged regions. And that is the genius of that particular article within the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, so that it sees and it feels and it gives the opportunity to every country and every region within the community, irrespective of size and irrespective of the old artifice of MDCs and LDCs. And why? Because we knew that once we were creating a CARICOM single market, there would be winners and there would be losers, and that there will always have to be a balancing arm. And your institution, therefore, in my view, as the lead Prime Minister for the CARICOM single market and single economy, remains the most vital institution if the regional integration project is not just to succeed, but to be sustained. We knew from day one that its capitalization would always be challenging. And we have tried by using contributions from governments in the 2 cycles so far. But as you well know, and as the rest of the region knows, the highly indebted nature of our governments has meant that some governments, therefore, have not been able appropriately to respond at scale. At the same time, the region has, and these figures are dated, in excess of $50 billion in bank savings, attracting fees of 0.001% in most instances. And when I say that the commercial banks have become more security guards, people get upset in this region. But I repeat it. And the evidence of the balance sheets is there to show that the spreads are simply too wide and do not relate to the level of risk even that they find here. The risk may be otherwise located, and we need different instruments to manage the risk. But the simple deposit and loan spread is unfair and unjust. And part of the difficulty is that our people will continue to be sucked into that vortex if we do not provide the financial literacy education that allows them to become mature investors. This fund here begins the process, not just of creating other options for our private sector beyond bank financing, which has become more and more difficult. I always found it curious, even before becoming Prime Minister, in fact, as far back as when I was Minister of Economic Affairs and Development back in 2006-07, that there is a diffidence and reluctance on the part of commercial banks to lend to the tourism sector, which is, for many countries, the leading financial sector, leading economic sector in the countries. Now, how do we get to that point? Or is it simply that the decisions on risk, just as the decisions on what you need to open an account, are being taken thousands of miles away and bear no relationship to the reality of our conditions? Africa went through a similar exercise. And many of the banks from the North Atlantic countries retreated, and they found that those that came to replace them had a different attitude and appetite towards risk and an appreciation for the realities on the ground of what people have faced. And their economies have not suffered since then. I hope that as we launch this CARICOM Development Fund's Resilience Fund, that we will also find room not just for the large investors, but for the small investors in the region who are paying security fees to a security guard. A Barbadian, a Grenadian, a Jamaican, a Guyanese, a Vincentian, a Lucian, any of our people should be able to say, I want a little better return on the $10,000 that I got in this bank account. I may not want to risk all, so let me take $5,000 out of it, Or let me take 3,000 out of it and put it in, because my daughter is 2 years old. And I will keep topping it up, because if the inflation rate is 4% or 5%, and I am getting 0.001%, who is benefiting in this equation? Now, if the rates at which the people were borrowing were equally within a 300-400 basis point spread, you might even say, okay. But when the rates for the average person borrowing is north of 8 and 10%, then, my friends, we need to have a serious debate. And I intend to put on the agenda of the next CARICOM Heads of Government meeting in February in Guyana to ask that our heads please address this issue of the role and functioning of banks within the Caribbean community. I also believe that we need to have a region-wide financial literacy program so that the average Caribbean person can understand what is available, what is their risk, what is their return, and also to have a mechanism that is as easy as going to the supermarket and taking something off a shelf and putting it into your cart. In other words, take out the red tape and take out the bureaucracy and take out the language that may intimidate the small investor from wanting to be able to pool their funds. Now, is this anything novel? Absolutely not. Because this region in the post-independence era has seen that it is the credit unions who have made provision and have fueled development of ordinary Caribbean people, working class people, more than any other. So much so that in our own experience when Rawdon, I see you here, your father, Tom Adams, introduced as Prime Minister and Minister of Finance the tax incentives to encourage the savings in the credit union, no one believed that it would reach the scale other than those who were passionate about it at the time of the decision, the scale that they have reached. And the majority of their deposits in the context of a country that's 267,000 people around, over 100,000 depositors and shareholders in the credit union movement. With what? Almost $2.5 billion in assets. This region is sitting on untapped energy and untapped potential. And this exercise this morning is the first step in going in the right direction. That it has been focused on the climate crisis is appropriate. Because you heard me say that for every dollar we spend in building resilience, we avoid $7 in damage. That it is not just the mission of governments, even though we carry the majority of responsibility, particularly in adaptation. But it is private sector firms who must mitigate their risk that will find opportunities in here. Individuals who in building their houses, from the smallest chattel house, the smallest bungalow, who must understand that the overhang of the roof will make all the difference between whether they have possessions and memories. Because you can replace the possessions, but the photographs and the trinkets and the jewelry and the things like that that have been passed on, once the roof is gone, is anybody's bet what happens to the rest of the property. That simple thing. So that in the same way households must change how we build, companies must change in this region how they become resilient. And I fear that with the current framework and metrics used for risk management by the commercial banks, they will not be equal to the task and to the time and pace that is required before us. And why? Because the climate crisis is evolving at a rate that is even shocking those of us who have been warning people to get their act together. In our own country, we are now determining that we have to make hay while the sun shines. And that is going to mean different structures and different work programs, particularly for infrastructure. It is going to mean trying to understand how to build climate resilient agriculture if we are going to feed our people and not be dependent on outside forces, and particularly disruptions in the supply chain. The perfect storm of the impact of the climate crisis on Panama Canal and at the same time on the Suez Canal with the war in Gaza means that we got to find our way within this Caribbean and Atlantic basin. It means that neighbors matter. It means that relationships matter. But it means that innovation must be the foundation of all that we do. And if innovation is the attitude that we must carry, finance and ready access to finance is the oxygen that will sustain us. The Barbados government has been working on the Blue-Green Investment Bank. And I want to thank once again USAID, the Green Climate Fund, Latin American Development Bank, otherwise known as CAF. CAF has committed $15 million to its seeding. The Green Climate Fund has committed $15 million to its seeding. The USAID has committed $2.5 million to its seeding. And the Barbados government has committed $15 million leveraging our Resilience and Sustainability Fund to be able to ensure greater capacity. We do not intend for this to be a Barbados bank, but we understood that if we wanted to get it off the ground quickly, that we needed to do the work. And we will now go to heads of government and to the broader region to encourage others to invest in this vital facility that is being established to help finance adaptation and mitigation projects in the Caribbean, in the Eastern and Southern Caribbean initially, but hopefully, if there is interest in the Northern Caribbean, in the entire Caribbean. Because if we do not have multiple sources of funding up to scale, we simply will not meet the race to being viable, insurable, and livable. And I therefore want to encourage others here today to join in the effort if there is interest on the part not just of other governments, but of private sector entities or institutional entities who would wish to be part of this capital, because our aim should be not simply to have the $47.5 million that we're starting with, which then will be leveraged, but we must seek, in my view, to be able to raise $500 million in seed capital over the next 5 years to make this a major player in the Caribbean in altering the lives of Caribbean people. And Roddy, you said that I like to challenge you. So that I would hope that at some point the CARICOM Development Fund will recognize that just as it's seeking to seed funds in the CARICOM Resilience Fund, that there may be a justifiable case for you to also participate in that other entity that is seeking to help disadvantaged countries, disadvantaged regions, disadvantaged sectors, but disadvantaged people and companies. Because if we cannot get insurance, and the most basic covenant for access to financing in our modern world is the covenant to ensure insurance, tell me what is going to happen to the microeconomy and ultimately the macroeconomy. Tell me what happens to that hotel in Antigua or Barbados or St. Kitts that will then be told all of a sudden that unless you have comprehensive insurance, we're not giving you this loan to upgrade so that you can ensure that you remain competitive and your average daily rates go up. Or to the tourism attractions that may be told that if you don't have the comprehensive insurance, that we will not be able to give you the financing. And what then starts happening to the competitiveness of the region? And if insurability becomes an issue, what then happens also to the investment attractiveness in the region for other people to bring their capital here? We have reached a critical point in our economies and in our civilizations. And it is no longer possible for us to wait and play the game that we played of very steady and sure steps since independence, because we may find ourselves without a region that is viable, insurable, and livable. And either we adapt, and adopt the pace of Bolt and Shelley-Ann, but the stamina that has been reflected in the resilient spirit of our ancestors. And that combination of pace and resilience is what, in my humble opinion, will help us get to the end. I say all of this while recognizing that there are international debates that must continue to change policy prescriptions. What is debt sustainability in the context of today's world? What should it be? Where are we going to get the issues of sufficient adaptation funds globally? And the belief that it will only come from governments across the world, it is clear that governments have neither the capacity and neither the appetite. And that therefore we have to open our minds to other forms of international levies and taxation to bridge the gap. And whether that is a 1% levy on international shipping that carries no responsibility now but contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, a $7 trillion trade that can lead to $70 billion a year in a 1% stamp duty, or whether it is looking at a small cess on financial transactions of 0.1, the numbers is 0.01 or 01 or 1, 0.1, that the banks love to operate in those minuscule decimal fractions, it should not bother them. Or whether it is a recognition that oil and gas companies, instead of walking away last year with $4 trillion, can walk away with $3.8 trillion and leave $200 billion on the table to be able to finance adaptation in a real way that allows the world to function. These measures are by no means exhaustive, but what they are realistic and to scale to allow us to ensure that in the same way the Caribbean region has had to know what it is to see districts and regions and countries become non-livable, that we do not want to repeat that for other countries. When I was a child, Montserrat was the Emerald Isle. Montserrat today hosts a fraction of its population. And those born in Montserrat had to face the indignity of dealing with the uncertainty of how they would be received in the country that still retained responsibility for them, the United Kingdom. There is nowhere for the republics of Barbados, Guyana, Trinidad, Dominica, for us to go. And therefore, if we accept that, then the reality is that that pace and that resilience must now characterize our future actions. I want to salute everyone who brought us to this point in ensuring that this CARICOM Resilience Fund can start. And just as the ambition for the Blue-Green Investment Bank must be to reach $500 million US as seed capital in the next 5 years, then I say to you, Roddy, that since you have a head start, and since you have a regional framework that is celebrating its 15th anniversary as its parent partner, that I believe that you should seek to ensure that within 5 years, this can be a $1 billion US fund fueling private sector companies in the region. God bless you.
Thank you very, very much to Prime Minister Motley for her usual rousing and inspiring remarks that challenge us all. As we continue through the program, we now call on President and CEO of Cygnus Capital, Mr. Beresford Gray, to deliver his remarks for us. Please give Mr. Gray a warm welcome.
Thank you. A very lovely video. Mr. Roger Nayos, Ambassador to Barbados, the Eastern Caribbean, and the OECS. Radinal Summer, CEO of the CARICOM Development Fund. Other distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I think the Prime Minister just inspired all of us. And I could have sat there and listened to her all day talking about impact, talking about climate and resilience. And Roddy, she laid out a very big challenge, 1 billion. But ladies and gentlemen, today is a very transformative day for the Caribbean. Absolutely transformative. And the initiative led by USAID, the CARICOM Development Fund, supported by Cross Boundary, to really pull together Caribbean economic resilience and climate fund is no mean feat. It is indeed transformative because it will address some of the glaring issues around economic resilience, climate risk, and how do we survive in a sustainable way going forward. And to achieve that, you really need capital at the forefront of that battle. You need capital in the form of the initiatives that the Prime Minister spoke about, Green Bank. You need philanthropical capital. You need funds, collective investment schemes that are focused on bringing together strategies and investment strategies that focus on sectors and areas that are akin to drive economic sustainability, mitigate risk associated with climate within our region. And that's what the CARICOM Resilience Fund is all about. So my job here today is really to run through it, give you an overview of not the intricacies, but the broad parameters around the fund. How will it work and how it will help us to start the journey or even continue the journey, so to speak, of building resilience and managing climate risk within the region. So let me start by just highlighting a few things. The CARICOM Development Fund, CDF, as I said before, is sponsoring a $100 million economic resilience and climate fund. We are fortunate to be selected to be the manager of this very innovative initiative. And I want to say that we are very grateful because, to be fair, this type of initiative fits very well with the Cygnus vision, which I will talk about. But simply put, the Cygnus vision is to drive economic growth across the region using innovative financing solutions. And the idea of sustainability, resilience, fit into our ambition to really unlock capital to propel and catalyze growth. What are the key objectives of the fund? Economic robustness. Within the region, we must have economic robustness. And by economic robustness, I mean that businesses in the region should be able to withstand external shocks. We saw that in COVID, a lot of businesses suffered significantly, and some actually didn't survive. That was a big external shocks. I mean, okay, it's a 1 in 100 years shock, but we also have experience where businesses don't survive hurricanes and flood and other internal shocks, or businesses don't survive external financial shocks because they just can't access financing enough, or other businesses in the hospitality sector go under because they are not able to sustain shocks when we don't have tourism coming to the region, within a 1-year period if you have a fall off. So we have to help to fund businesses in a way that allow them to be sustainable and can actually adapt to these shocks. Structural diversification. And structural diversification here, I actually listened to the Prime Minister and I realized when we talk about structural diversification, we are talking about both physical and let's say non-physical, and she pointed to a structure that I'm pretty sure my investment banking team is going to take up when we execute on this fund, is the way you look at mitigating, we call it in finance, force majeure, right? How do you mitigate that, knowing very well that in a vulnerable region like the Caribbean, we are bound to have hurricanes, flood, and other disruptive force majeure matters. How do we mitigate that such that we don't have to, when it happens, go start a negotiation? And I think that's let's call it a non-physical diversification play that we have to implement as we look at deploying capital from the CDF. From a physical infrastructure point of view, I think everyone in this room knows that the Caribbean has a huge deficit in terms of infrastructure gap, whether it's road, ports, which are critical in importing and distribution logistic, whether it's airports, especially for tourism sector. So we have huge gaps in physical infrastructure, housing and housing infrastructure. Are they built appropriately to withstand shocks? So we have to ensure that we achieve that objective. Capital accessibility. One of the reasons why Cygnus exists is really about addressing that issue from a private sector point of view. And I truly believe that the CARICOM Development Fund is going to play, I truly believe that the Caribbean Resilience Fund is going to play a critical role in capital accessibility. And when I get into the design of the fund, that include blended financing structure, which allow for equity to be part of the capital, you will get a better understanding of what I'm talking about. There are many projects led by medium-sized businesses, new projects in energy, renewable projects, waste management, different areas that are tied to sustainability that cannot access capital. First, they cannot access equity, for example, to start the company, to seed the company, much less accessing debt. And that has caused a stunt in both entrepreneurship as well as let's say, the fall away or the unrealization of many projects that could have by now be contributing to the region in a positive way. So capital accessibility is a big issue for firms right across the Caribbean, whether it's firms that could do P3 projects that could help to drive infrastructure and address the structural diversification matter, or firms that can help to drive growth to export and help to build resilience. No capital. No capital. Regional exposure to impact. I was doing a research last night on the global impact market. This is the amount of capital in the impact space. In 2022, it was 1.2 trillion. That was some research done by GIN, which is the Global Impact Investing Network. And it is forecasted to reach 4.5 billion by 2030. How much of that are we attracting in the Caribbean? How much of that are we attracting in one of the most vulnerable economic blocks in the world? Certainly, I believe the CRF is going to play an important role in showing that the region can create a fund, focus on particular themes, deploy it responsible, address some of the big issues, and it will catalyze other investors to come into the region to play a serious role in addressing some of our needs in terms of impact investing strategies. At the end of the day, I think that the Caribbean is an attractive area for investors. We have great laws, great history of managing capital, great history of being stable democracies. So we should be attracting capital from the pool of impact investing money that is out there. And I think the Resilience Fund is going to set that platform and catalyze investors to get some exposure to the region through this fund and then increase appetite to participate in this new theme, impact investing. And finally, capacity building. In my opinion, this is probably the most impactful part of the CRF. We are going to have about 5% of the fund dedicated to working with businesses for capacity building. This includes training, helping them to do studies, helping them to develop metrics that will help them to better measure impact, helping them to understand some of the process efficiencies that their business can put in place to develop resilience. You'd be surprised, actually, how many medium-sized firms in the Caribbean don't even have a training program, don't send their people on training, basic training. They don't even have BCP plans, for example, because they just don't have the money to hire somebody to write that process. And when there's a hurricane, people are running around the businesses that is exposed to great business risk. All right, so this is a snapshot of the fund itself and the strategy. So as I already said, it's $10 million US. It's a 10-year fund. We are thinking about domiciling it in Barbados, and I would say that we have, well, based on the work that my partner, Dr. Ike Johnson, is doing, we will determine that, but it is highly desirable that we domicile it in Barbados. Because, frankly speaking, Barbados, from a regional point of view, is a champion led by the Prime Minister herself for climate and economic resilience. We heard her broke it down in dollars and cents and really paint a strong imagery of the risk we face. So we are looking at Barbados as a jurisdiction, and of course we will have international investors, so we will have different, let's call them feeder funds, where international investors can actually participate through these vehicles. The fund will have 3 classes of shares: share A, B, and C. And each class will bring different returns. A, we are targeting a IRR, that's a targeted return of 9.75. B, 10.50, and C, 6%. And I'll explain further why you have the distinction, and you will also see, back to the Prime Minister's point, as well as the CEO of CDF point, why C class is so important, and what do we mean by blended finance, and how will C class catalyze capital into A and B. The fund will be geographically diversified across the CDF member countries, and we will look at those. And there's also a way that capital will be allocated amongst those countries. We will invest using various forms of instruments. We will do debt, secure, unsecure. We do pref share. We will do mezzanine financing. And of course, we'll do equity. And as I said before, equity, if you look at the capital structure of firms in the region, and you talk about economic resilience, climate, renewables, projects, medium-sized firms, ideas that can come to life and play a very important role in our economy, they are starved of equity. They are starved of debt, of course, but equity as being the biggest challenge that we face. Of course, we'll focus on SME and various projects along resilience sectors. And I talked already about technical assistance. I'll give you a little flavor on that. So in summary, that's what the fund is going to look like. Let's dig a little bit deeper into the fund. So, as you know, in the Caribbean, the Caribbean is like the Caribbean countries, really, is like a typical Caribbean family, right? You have some cousins who are well off, others who are not well off, and you have to interact. You got to know how to help those who are not so well off, and the ones who are not so well off will also contribute to you. So, but it's a one big family. Everybody's playing different roles. So you have to have balance. Some economies are at different stage in their infrastructure development. Others are at frontier stages, so to speak. Some are, have GDP per capita of 5,000, others at 16,000. So there are different gaps. So the way we break the allocation is into two groups. Non-official development assistant countries, or ODA, as well as official development assistant countries, which represent bulk of the countries, the member countries of the CDF. So you can see on your left, for example, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and St. Kitts, we will be allocating approximately 30% of the fund's capital to those territories and 70% to the others who are, let's say, your cousins who are not as well off. But at the end of the day, we expect to have a well-diversified portfolio across the region from a geographic point of view, where all the countries who are members of CDF are benefiting from this initiative. There's also some discussion going on. I think Rod spoke to other countries who are members of CARICOM but not members of CDF, but they are just as vulnerable. So there's some discussion going on how we bring them into this initiative. So, we'll take those discussions and hopefully they are fruitful. But I think it's, again, recognizing the vision that at the end of the day, the whole Caribbean region, and let me say CARICOM region, is exposed to common risk around resilience and climate. But these are the countries that we will be allocating capital to. Now, for those who have been involved in impact investing, there are several themes in terms of sustainable development goals established by the UN, and these sort of form the cornerstone of how you sort of wrap resilience, climate, and all other type of investment thesis and try to fit into those goals as they sort of will represent the big impact globally. For us, the CRF is going to focus on some specific sectors. And, I highlight some of them here. And it's about 7 of them. Housing, affordable and sustainable housing. I think in Barbados has actually started an initiative here that I was reading about, which is really, really good. It's called the Hope Initiative, which is where they try to, and the government is actually leading the charge, sort of taking the first loss on these type of projects, where they are taking the first loss on house construction, but they want these houses to be efficient, which Barbados really has led the charge in having solar and so forth on houses for a long time. But they want them to be efficient, solar, invertible AC, and so forth, as well as built, I think the Prime Minister hinted to that, built in a sustainable way so that they can withstand climate shock, hurricanes, etc. And the government is taking the charge on that. And it's doing well. I admire that program. So effectively, when we talk about sustainable housing, those are some of the things we are talking about, whereby if the government lead a charge like that, then private sector developers can take on that same type of structure, and CDF can play a role in helping to finance those projects along with private sector capital. So you end up with scale, sustainable and efficient housing. And we know that there's a huge housing gap right across the Caribbean. Houses are built in the wrong place. Houses are inappropriately built. As soon as there's a storm or a flood, we have huge problems. Energy. The Caribbean probably have some of the highest per kilowatt costs for energy. I would probably say, well, certainly in the Americas. You know, the cost out, if you take Trinidad out of it, and probably Suriname, and maybe now Guyana, you know, maybe now, I'm not sure about that, you will realize that the per kilowatt cost for energy in the Caribbean easily ranges between 30 cents per kilowatt to like 50. As a matter of fact, I was in Barbados and in Bahamas earlier this week, and we were having discussion with the Ministry of Finance because they were thinking about renewables and how do they accelerate the pace of renewables in their economy. And they were telling us that in some of the family islands, these are the smaller islands, but they still, you know, some of the smaller islands are as big as, you know, a medium-sized island in the Caribbean, right? The energy cost is as high as 70 cents per kilowatt. That's crazy. So it is, it's not even debatable that we have to invest a lot in renewables, solar, wind, various form of energy, biomass energy, all type of energy that could reduce our energy costs, reduce our carbon footprint, and make the region more efficient. Transportation. For us who grew up in the Caribbean and now that we are adults, travel around the region. First, transportation back home in most Caribbean islands is difficult. Transportation between the islands are even more difficult and inefficient. Ports. Only in recent time have you had large investment in a sustainable way in our ports. But yet we are countries that rely a lot on logistics to survive. Our airports, if you look at our airport stock, few of them have been renovated, redesigned in the last decade, right? Or even if they have been redeveloped, it's in parcels, right? Yet we rely a lot on tourism for our main foreign exchange earnings. And I could go on, roadways, all these type of infrastructure gap, the CRF is going to help us to lead the way in addressing them. P3 projects, there are tons of P3 projects in the region that I personally know of that can't get going. Why? Either because the sponsor of the project don't have the capital to do the feasibility study, don't have the capital to inject the equity that is needed so he can leverage it up, so the project falls away. With CRF, we will be able to participate in those type of projects that will drive long-term infrastructure development. The blue economy. You know, I was, so in Jamaica, the government has removed duty on EVs. I think Barbados already done that anyway, a while back. And we have seen significant growth in the importation of EVs. The Caribbean is slow off the mark with EVs. The reality, though, is that if you look into the future, during the life of the CRF, you're going to have more and more EVs coming into the region, which means that we will have to build out infrastructure to support these type of transportation. And around it, there will be a whole lot of other accessories and blue, let's call them blue economy initiatives that need to take place. Another problem in the Caribbean is waste, solid, what do you call it? Waste management. We have that huge problem in Jamaica. You have that in Bahamas. You have that in Barbados. As a matter of fact, we just met not too long ago with a potential opportunity in Barbados that has to look at rehabbing a piece of land that was damaged by oil. So you have all of these type of projects that are there waiting to be addressed. So the opportunity is vast. All right. I will just touch on fintech, fintech e-commerce. The Caribbean, again, we are a small population, small economy. How do you scale? How do you build resilience? How do you allow for e-commerce to take place, or commerce to take place at a high pace and an efficient pace? Right now, globally, e-commerce is about 23–24% of retail. In the Caribbean, it's nowhere close to that. COVID had caused a lot of firms to pivot, but COVID have also taught us that to have economic resilience, you need to digitize the economy, both in terms of financial services, retail services, and various other services. These are the type of things that the CRF is going to allow us to do to build economic resilience. The technical assistance I touch on, but needless to say that here you are looking at, and we have business people in the room, we are looking at a huge role. When you talk about $5 million available for businesses to train and improve processes, and this can be in the form of a grant or a facility that is paid back when the project becomes viable or profitable. Business people will take that any day, all day, because they just don't have access to this type of capital, grant capital that is helping them to build capabilities. So this is going to be a big game changer in the success of the CRF. All right, this we normally call the money slide. And you know, at the end of the day, the CRF is trying not only to provide the first loss piece through the CDF and other participants, but the big role, as the Prime Minister stated, is to really catalyze private capital into economic resilience and climate financing. So, when I said we break the capital structure into three pieces, Senior A, that's where we expect most of the commercial and private capital to flow in. And they will be getting, the goal right now is a preferred rate of 8% and a target return at the end of the fund life of 7.5. Senior B, we anticipate a lot of multilaterals and other international investors to participate in that tranche. They will be getting a preferred rate of 7.5 and a 1050 IRR. And the junior tranche, or Class C, that's where CDF, who seeded the fund, will be participating with other investors who have the appetite for equity. And they will get a preferred return of 4 and a target return of 6. This is the beauty of this construct. Every investor in A and B are effectively being protected by the equity tranche. So when we meet with investors to help them to understand what we want them to do, to say, invest in economic resilience and climate sustainability in the Caribbean, these are the areas that we are asking you to invest in. These are viable projects, and these projects are giving you an investment opportunity that if you compare it to, say, a fixed income bond that is unprotected, that is giving you 8 or 9% for 10 years, this is a superior investment because you have equity investment in the fund that is protecting you. It's a win-win because you are getting a great return which is comparable or better to other returns available to you, and you are protected. But most importantly, you are investing in sustainability, and resilience. If you, let's take it argument a little bit further, right? For those of you following climate finance, you'll know that a lot of banks now are actually looking at deep risk around climate finance, whereby if you have a hurricane, if a hurricane hit Jamaica, for example, and you are a bank, you are exposed to a portfolio of businesses that get hit. You can go and call default on them. And you might recover something, but normally your best bet is to go and negotiate. There's no protection against climate risk. In our structure, there's protection. There's a first loss protection for your investment. The important thing, though, is that because of that first loss protection, which is taking equity risk, you are making a portfolio of investment way more viable. Why? Because you are giving businesses equity, which they are being starved of. And these businesses can actually use more leverage in their own corporate structure and probably grow even faster than they could have without the help of a CDF fund. So it's a win-win all around. And we believe that when we present this in more detail to private sector investors, multilateral, we expect them to really see this as a beautiful construct. All right. So I just went through generally what the fund will look like, the construct, the different things. Of course, there's a lot more detail around a fund. So the question potential investors in this room might ask, will you be able to deploy the capital? And I think Cross Boundary did a thorough due diligence on Cygnus, and we appreciate and love CDF for endorsing us. The reality is that Cygnus as an origination machine that is incomparable across the region. And as a consequence, we right now have over 90 million of mandated deals that fall into the industry categories that I just went through that can fit into the CRF fund today. We have deals that we are closing now that if the CRF was fully operational, that deal would fit right in CRF. We're closing that deal, when? Next week? Yeah, we're closing a $20 million deal next week. So I'm saying this to say, have no fear nor doubt about the ability for us to deploy capital from, I think the most northern island is what, St. Vincent? Southern. So, yeah, from St. Vincent in the south to Jamaica in the north. We have no issue with that. So we are very excited about this because we know that upon first close, we will let investors' money start creating an impact along the theme of economic resilience and climate within very short order. This is a quick overview of how the governance of the fund will look. Cygnus is very big on governance. We're big on having best-in-class governance, and that's the reason why I wanted to just give the audience a quick overview. So you will see that Cygnus Capital will be the manager. We have our internal committee called Investment and Risk Management Committee. That committee and our chairman of that committee is here, Mr. Milton Brady, who is also the chairman of Cygnus Capital. That committee will make all investment decisions. It's an independent committee, meaning the members are largely independent of the manager. We will add to that committee one or two more persons, and also have our partner who I forgot to mention, but have them to really dig more into detail. Our partner, Rocky Mountain Institute, who will be advising us in terms of climate and regulatory work for energy projects, advising the committee when it comes on to those type of asset. We will also have a shareholders advisory committee at the, let's say, the fund level, and that's a collection of a group of shareholders so that there can be communication between the shareholders and the fund manager and the board. If there are things, for example, there's an exemption on a particular asset that the board approve, or if there's concern about a portfolio company or something, the shareholder group can raise that matter so that the manager can address it. And of course, you'll have a board of directors for the fund and the anchor investors. Anchor investors are investors that invested 10 million US and up. Obviously, CDF will be our sponsor and first anchor. So other anchors who would like to sit on the board of the fund, you are invited to invest $10 million. The benefit of an anchor is really, really great. You be a board member, so all the reports that the investment management team in Cygnus have to produce, they go through it in detail for you. And believe me, our reports are very detailed, right? Including now layering on the impact investing reports. Interestingly too, for anchors, and this probably for anchors in the Caribbean, you can, and these are more for the pension funds, but of course if we have international anchors, you have that opportunity to, where we are doing large transactions, you can actually co-invest with us directly. So those are some of the benefits that anchors get. This is a short summary on CDF. I think everyone in the room know of CDF. If you don't know of CDF, as the Prime Minister said, and Rod said, CDF is a, let's say, transformative CARICOM multilateral agency that has a big mandate to really promote integration among the CARICOM members and to really enhance economic development. CDF, of course, is funded by the members, and today they have about 155 million in AUM and 140 in capital. And they really, in these instances, have laid the foundation, I would say, for other regional multilaterals to admire, envy, and do something. Do something. Do something incredible. So I want to really applaud Rod and his team. For really starting a journey, as I said at the start of my conversation, that is going to be transformative for the Caribbean. Believe me. We will probably raise, I don't know, $1 billion. That's what the Prime Minister said anyway. But this is going to be a transformative journey. I also want to take the opportunity while I'm on this slide, of course, to really express our gratitude to Cross Boundary, the USAID, for really pushing this initiative forward. And Jamie, I know that the due diligence was painful, mostly for us, really, because you guys were just asking so many questions, and But as I said, it was a great learning exercise for us, because sometimes when you are in the weeds working on executing strategy, you really don't get the chance to step back and look at your business and look at the strength of your business and how you can really contribute, and also understand the amount of data that you are creating as a firm until someone come and actually say, I want to see everywhere in the house. You actually don't realize all the work you are doing sometimes. So Jamie and the cross-boundary team, we really appreciate the exercise. All right. Just a blurb about Cygnus. And I won't spend long on this because I know it's almost lunchtime. So Cygnus was founded 7 years ago. And myself and my partner, Ike Johnson, Gazanazan, and Jason Morris, our chief investment officer, who founded the firm. It's really about identifying these gaps in the society in the Caribbean. And the main gap that we were really concerned about, having spent many years at the large banks that the Prime Minister talked about, was access to financing for medium-sized firms. And access to financing in a way that is creative, flexible, and impactful. And that's why we embarked on a journey to create an alternative investment firm. So Cygnus is all about access to financing, impact in investing, driving the velocity of economic growth, using creative financing solution. And we are going to bring that mindset to the CRF. Cygnus is also all about governance. Our 3 principles, we are anchoring what we call our 3 principle: innovation, integrity, and independence. Those are non-negotiable in the way every Cygnesian think, in the way our investment philosophy is anchored. And as a consequence, it has helped us to raise large capital from institutional investors. So the $450 million that we currently manage right now, along our 3 main sleeves of private credit, real estate, and private equity, most of that capital comes from institutional investors, whether it's in Puerto Rico, led by James' team, or whether it's in Jamaica. And the reason for that is that we are serious about risk management, serious about governance, and we operate our business that way because we believe in delivering sustainable returns for investors. You got to manage your downside. It's not only the upside. Finally, Caribbean. We are now in 3 countries covering the whole region: Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and St. Lucia. But make no joke about it. We currently invest in more than 9 different Caribbean countries across at least 13 sectors. So even though we are physically in 3 locations, we're a truly Caribbean firm. And most of the senior people in the firm have spent years traveling up and down the Caribbean: Dutch Caribbean, Southern Caribbean, Central Caribbean, and Northern Caribbean, of course, where it's a little bit easier to travel. I'm sure you'd say it's easier to travel in the South. So that's Cygnus, who will be, let's say, be the steward of your capital. Now, I know that I've bored you a lot going through the intricacies of the fund. Now, this is my sales pitch, okay? When I was younger, I was a great salesman. Ask yourself everything that Beres has said, everything. It really boiled down to the 5 compelling reasons for you to invest and participate in the CRF. There are 5. There are a lot of others that you can sort of formulate, but for us, we believe that there are 5 reasons. The first one, and I really should have had the Prime Minister articulating this one: investing in a sustainable Caribbean future. Investing in a sustainable Caribbean future. We have to play a key role in reversing, or at least contributing to reversing the impact as well as the risk that we face from climate change, shocks, that the environment issues, infrastructure degradation. We have to invest in that, and we have to start now. Because if we don't, we won't have beautiful beaches in the Caribbean that when it's cold in North America, you can come down for a few days. It won't exist. I was telling a story yesterday. When we were growing up, there were beautiful beaches close to Kingston. And by the time I finished university, and I didn't spend 15 years at university, okay? the beach didn't exist. And the same thing, I'm sure there are people experiencing that throughout the Caribbean. So we have to invest in climate. We have to invest in energy that reduces our carbon footprint. We have to invest in a sustainable Caribbean future. Origination. The question people always pose, and especially multilaterals, and you know, Lucas, I'm not sort of hitting you, you know, but I've spent hours speaking with multilaterals, and they always say to me, how do you deploy the capital? Where do you find the pipeline? I'm always at loss. Why? Because I never have that problem. I've never seen that as a binding constraint. The binding constraint that we face is what? Capital. That's the binding constraint. Capital. We have 150 million in pipeline now. And we don't even start marketing the fund. I don't even start going out to meet people and present the fund. Greg, our head of investment banking, haven't even started talking about the fund. You know, our other originators, our other partners across the region have not started talking about the fund. Our binding constraint is not finding opportunities that fit in economic resilience and climate. It's about the capital. So our job will be to raise as much capital as possible for the fund, because we have the opportunities that will make a difference. Dedicated sponsor and strategic partner. I almost doesn't need to say anything about this. For CDF to really lead the charge and put $15 million, you know, $15 million. We need to give you a round of applause. It might sound small for our friends from North America, okay? But for us, it's massive. I don't want to digress too much. But, you know, when Cygnus just started, our first capital raise was $5 million. And it was really hard to raise $5 million, okay? So to be part of an effort where the seed money is $15 million, speak to the commitment of CDF to make this happen. And we are going to work with you to make this happen, along with the other partners. Our track record has been built up over the last 15 years in Jamaica. But in Puerto Rico, James and his team has been around for 20 years. And they have been doing impact investing in that market for a long while now. So we have a lot of experience to draw on. Plus, we also have Rocky Mountain Institute, who we are working with to help us with renewables and other expertise that we might need. So we believe that we have the right team, and we will be recruiting people to support this effort. So we will make it happen from a resource point of view. And finally, we are not only talking about first loss. We are talking to private sector investors. we are going to provide for you an attractive rate of return, which have protection in it that you cannot get a good substitution for. So this is going to be a win-win investment for you. So we are offering a very attractive risk-adjusted return along each of the classes of shares. And if you understand this, which I think everyone in the room understands, then I think you will say that we have 5 compelling reasons to invest. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you very much and have a great day.
Round of applause again for Beres. We had to switch around the program a little bit to accommodate the Prime Minister. Of course, we were so grateful that she was able to take time out of a busy schedule. So I think Beres's last slide, he really brought it to life. He brought everything to life. And I think he was able to pull together the elements that would make this a success, so to remind us. So I just want to, I'm reluctant to say thank you because I don't want you to go anywhere, right? This is just part 1. But I must say thank you to the Prime Minister. Obviously, she's not here for the sterling work that she's doing as an advocate, not just for the Caribbean, but SIDS globally. I want to thank USAID again for partnering with us at the ground level, which is what I always say when I speak to Mervyn and his team. This is where it really matters. And I know the CDF has taken the initiative to provide a first loss capital, but we are looking for other partners to help us to establish a foundation so that we could raise not just 100 million, but given the challenge that the PM has put to us, we can start looking at 200 million maybe for this one, and then go back out, look at other vehicles, and scale up eventually to the $1 billion that we've been challenged to raise. So we see you, of course, as the first core set of partners in this initiative, and we hope that with the presentations that you've received so far, that you will be convinced that this is a viable proposition for you, and we look forward to your participation and engagement as we have Aisha officially closed and get ready for the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rodinald, and thanks to everyone as we went through this program. We should be going to coffee break, but we're going to have to just switch it up a bit to accommodate our time overrun. Coffee is available as well as juice in the back of the room. We also want to take this moment to pause for a group photo, but I think we'll have to. Ambassador, you have to leave, right? No? Okay, thank you very much, comms. If you will join us at the front, the photographer, Andrew, will arrange you. We're asking for the ambassador, Rodinald, Barris, Mervyn. Please, Andrew Brown is the photographer and he will direct you at this point. Ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to help yourself to some coffee, restroom, and then we will move directly into the panel discussions, which I will introduce.